Now, this is the original Blayney Castle. I'm not going into much detail on this one. Built about 1607, it started. That's the Black Island in the background. So this island is this painting was done from the bottom of the Shrubbery Hill, coming down from Barney's Green, and it was built there. I think this is the castle that was dismantled, and some of it was taken out and became McMahon's Castle out in Conquerwood, and some of it was then dismantled when they were building walls here, and they took bits of it and stuck it in and built walls. It's a 3-story building, very tall. It definitely had cellars. It had to have deep foundations, and that, I think, is what they mistook for tunnels rather than actual. Whether the full house was ever built or not, but it was lived in from 1607 to 1641 and was never lived in again. The McMahons took it over. They didn't destroy it or they didn't burn it. They ransacked it and plundered it, which are different words from burning or destroying it. They stole everything out of it, McMahon's were. Right? And this is another painting of the same building from the bottom of the Shrubbery Hill, looking back towards the town and giving you an idea of the depth of the building and how big a building it was. And I think disappeared when Lord Blayney built the Hope Castle, partly into the Hope Castle. Some of it was reused, but some of it was taken away because it was in the way. And you can see the sort of platform it's on. It's an artificial platform. This is a beautiful painting done of Lord Blayney's new house when he built it in 1795 to 1799. This painting is in the museum in Monaghan. There's a number of them. Museum, I don't know if they've got them released now at their new museum in Monaghan, whether they're on display or not, but they were in the cellars of the old museum. I snuck down one day and managed to illegally take photographs of them all, and I'm not supposed to have them, but anyway I have. And you can see it's a Georgian building, right? Front door, 5 bay windows facing the lake. This painting, initially I thought it was done from the White Island looking up, but I think now it must be from the shrubbery, the bottom of the Shrubbery Hill looking up. No, it's a painting, it's not a photograph, so you can't take it as being accurate. And the 5 windows here, you see these 5? 1, 2, 3, are the 5 facing up to the church on the other side of the Hope Castle looking up the hill. And the wee conservatory or kitchens stuck on at the back here, right? That's what Lord Blayney built. The Hope Castle is actually the Blayney Castle, okay? Now, I was in London one year, and I went up by, and if you're in London next, would you go up to the Sir John Soane Museum, which is up near St Paul's Cathedral up at Lincoln's Inn, and go in and look around. It's a fabulous museum. He's got all sorts of nonsense and rubbish. But John Soane was the biggest architect in London around about 1800. He designed the Bank of Ireland building in London. He designed large numbers of buildings in London. He did a plan for Buckingham Palace, but they didn't buy his plan. They took somebody else's plans, but he intended to be. And Soane, the best of the Georgian architects of that period. There's a room in his museum when you go into it, and I think it's fantastic. They only allow about 8 people into it, and it's a relatively small room. And when you stand in the room, there are paintings on each of the 3 walls of all the houses that he designed or built. Not all of them were built. He's got a painting of the Buckingham Palace that was never built, and they're all there. But then you fold up over one of the walls like a page of a book, and on the back of it there's more paintings, and then there's more there, and then the next wall folds over again, and they keep folding them, and you keep seeing all these. And the reason so few people are let in because you have to, the walls open like a book. Lovely place to go. But I found the original plans for the Hope Castle in the Sir John the Soane Museum in London, because the man who designed our Hope Castle, Robert Woodgate, was a student of Soane's in London, and when he got the plans for the Hope Castle, or the Blayney Castle as its correct name, he sent them to John Soane, who's kept them, and they're in his, and I sent them whatever it was, £50, and they sent me a copy of them. right? And this is a copy of the front door of the Hope Castle, well, Blayney Castle I'll call it, hasn't been redesigned yet. And the front door is not where the front door is today. It's not there today anymore, because they're taking it away. It was on the other side facing out to the lake, right? So walk around the side facing the lake, and these two semicircles are still there. This one and this one. There's a window on each side, and there's 5 bays across the top here, but the wall is not level the whole way across, so no one there can maybe explain what it is. The 2 bays on either side come out about 6 inches from the 3 in the middle. They're sort of recessed in a little bit, but it was to do to strengthen the wall, having an angle in it. But the 5 windows are not equally spaced. The 3 in the middle are, but the 2 at either end, because they're on the wall comes forward a wee bit, right? They're slightly different, and it's got a great roof. Now the door was a fabulous Georgian door, and this is an exact replica of it. That's what it looked like. Mrs. Hope destroyed that door. I don't know where it went to. Now that particular door photograph is in the square in St. Patrick's College in Maynooth, which was built at exactly the same time, 1795. And if those who know Maynooth, go down the main street, go into the college, in through the front door, the quad, and at the back of the quad there's a big square called St. Joseph's Square, and that door is entrance to the seminary in Maynooth. Beautiful. You see the way the windows on both sides don't come all the way down, as ours doesn't, right? But it's the fanlight, the beautiful fanlight over the door, well worth seeing. And the fanlights, of course, are very Georgian. They're done in the shape of a seashell, and the idea was that a lot of the people in Dublin who built the Georgian buildings, the ones you know in Mountjoy Square and Merrion Square and so on, were captains who had come from ships that were in the South Seas. And apparently in the Pacific Islands and the South Seas, putting up a seashell over your door was a sign of good luck. Same way we put up a horseshoe, right? And then when they designed their fan lights, they made them in the shape of seashells for good luck. And then they became glass. Now, quite a number of our houses in the town have nice fan lights over their doors. But that's what our Hope Castle front door would have looked like before Mrs. Hope destroyed it. Now, the building looked like this. It's got 3 stories. This is a, what's that called, transection, separate, it's called cutting of it, showing you the 3 floors. Now, the front door is here at the front. Now, when you walked in the front door, there was a hall behind it. And when you went upstairs, there was a spiral staircase in the middle of the house to take you up to the first floor where the bedrooms and all were. Not a big flowing staircase that we might remember in it. It was a spiral staircase, right? But when you got to the first floor, it's not a typical Georgian roof. It's 2 different roofs. And in the middle, there was a glass, it's not a dome, it's more like a pyramid rather than a dome, but it's like a glass dome, right? In the middle of the roof, and the light came in through that and lit the landing, which was just below it, where all the doors into the bedrooms were, and then went on down through the spiral staircase and lit the hall. And that beautiful thing is gone as well. It's disappeared as well. And that's a lovely, non-Georgian type extra wee bit in that house that's definitely well worth looking at. Now, this is a plan of the bottom of the house when Blayney built it. Mrs. Hope redesigned all this. She was the first uncle who got at the castle. This is the front door here, facing the lake, the other side, okay? You walked in, and this was, apologies. This was the hallway. This is the spiral staircase, going up the middle of the house. This very long room here was the drawing room. That's facing the Shrubbery Hill. It's got 5 windows in it. Very long room, very, very long room. And that was sort of the day-to-day where the Blayneys would have lived. The 3 rooms on the other side, the one in the middle here was the dining room. And there were 3 windows in the dining room along with a curved wall. That is now where the front door is, right? but originally that was the dining room, and you looked out, you had your dining. And when you finished dining, right, the ladies went into the ladies' room for the port wine and the gossip, okay? The gentlemen then went into the gentleman's room, which is for the brandy and the cigars, right? And they had their discussion here. And the little room here at the back, D, is the billiard room. So there's a snooker table in it, right, as well. And those were the rooms that were on the ground floor when Blayney built the house, when Robert Woodgate designed it. Mrs. Hope changed it by putting the front door around to the dining room and putting her sitting room at the front and cutting the drawing room in 2 rooms. She built a wall across the middle and divided it, and then built more rooms, extended the building down the ways. Now this staircase here leads down to the kitchens. So the servants could go down to the kitchen and then come up with all the meals. And then the other half of the staircase then went up stairs. And some of the servants would, of course, have lived up in the attic. And that was the original plan of our castle. That's the back of the castle looking up towards the church. Now today there's a statue in the middle of that, in the middle window. And it's still there. Well, the County Council will soon get at it and destroy it, but it's still there at the moment anyway. The statue is not St. Bridget or any of them religious saints. It's a Greek statue, and the reason it's a Greek statue is because Henry Thomas Hope did not collect diamonds. It was his uncle collected the diamonds. He collected statues and spent a lot of time in Greece and Rome. I don't know if that statue is an original one stolen from a Greek temple, or whether he got it made in London as a plaster copy. If it's an original Greek temple statue, it's worth money, right? But it's definitely a Greek goddess, and I'm trying to find out which of the Greek goddesses it is. But it's a Greek goddess, it's not a religious statue. This, of course, is Mrs. Hope's house, and you can see where she's put the front door. She's made this her sitting room so she can sit there in a little porch and look out over the lake. And this bit here is her extension, right, to add on rooms and add on bedrooms. Now, a very, very quick lesson in poor Mrs. Hope. Mrs. Hope was a French lady called Anne Bechet. She was born somewhere down near Marseille in the south of France. She was living in Paris. Henry Thomas Hope was a member of the English Parliament. And the Hopes were huge bankers. They made their money. They were originally, it's believed, a Scottish family, right, who went, there's no 100% certain on that one, but it's felt they were Scottish. They went to Amsterdam, and they started banking in Amsterdam, taking money from people who were importing and exporting, particularly from the United States, and they would put the money up, investing. They weren't bankers in the day-to-day, me and you going in and out of them. They were big investment bankers and became hugely rich in Amsterdam. And they spelled their name H-O-E-P, right? A Dutch spelling of it. And the Hopes became the richest people in the world. Their banks, everybody used it, particularly the big merchants. Amsterdam was the biggest port in the world at one stage. And as well as that, the Hopes, as they became richer and richer, of course, they eventually sold the bank to a family called Barings. It became the Barings Bank. And about 20 years ago, the Barings Bank went bankrupt and nearly took the world economy to its knees. It was so big. They were actually lending money to countries. Unfortunately, with the Hopes, that didn't happen. They lost all their money. They were still very rich. And Henry Thomas Hope, with his interest in statues and sculpture, used to go to the South Bank in Paris, right? And when he was in the South Bank of Paris, he had a mistress, Anne Bechet, and she became pregnant, and they had a daughter, Henrietta, and they were living in Paris, and they were together for about 10 or 12 years. They raised the girl as their own, but they were still married at this stage. And then Henry's mother died, and the week after his mother died, he married Anne Bechet and technically legitimised her child as his own daughter. She became Henrietta Hope. Now, they're not lords or anything, they're just, Anne Bechet just became Mrs. Hope and is known here in the town as Mrs. Hope. Eventually, they had to be brought into London society. They had a huge house in Surrey, they had a huge house in Nottingham, they had 2 huge houses in London, one of which is now, I think, the Ambassador Hotel in Mayfair. And their house in Mayfair was so big that when people came to dinner, they could seat 600 people in the dining room, right? And they decided then that when Henry got married, he was a bit older than his wife, they would have a big party and invite all the gentry of London to come to the party. The story is that when she came into the room, all the women turned their back on her because they saw her as a mistress, right? And because she had an illegitimate child, and this was one big scam. Henry Hope didn't care about that. He had enough money that he didn't have to care. And most of these families owed him money anyway, because he was the banker. And Mrs. Hope, I think from then on, hated the Brits and hated the English. She was badly treated. The only man who went over to talk to her apparently was the Prince of Wales, right? But the Prince of Wales owed them probably more money than anyone else. And he talked to her anyway, and that's sort of what she brought in. Unfortunately, they bought the estate here. The Blaney's went bankrupt. Probably owed the Hope Bank millions, and the Hopes got the estate anyway, and so they started doing it up. There were no sooner owners of our estate, as well as the other estates still in England. Henry dropped dead of a heart attack, and Mrs. Hope is now a widow with her own daughter Henrietta, and they came here to live. Now, they spent their summers here, but they had other houses they could circulate into, and Mrs. Hope then started to spend money in this town wholesale, right? The one thing she wanted, of course, was to get her daughter married, and wanted to get her daughter married to nobility. But no member of any of the noble families of England would marry her, right? Even though she's the richest girl in the world, or one of the richest girls in the world. But there was a family from Newcastle under Lyme, not the Newcastle for the football team, but from Newcastle under Lyme, a man called the Duke of Newcastle. And the Duke of Newcastle had 2 sons, and his youngest son was looking for a wife, so they married Henrietta Hope off to him. Now, this man was the greatest waster, chancer, womanizer, gambler that you could possibly imagine, but they married Henrietta off to him anyway. It's the only husband they could get for her. And then a very strange thing happened. The old Duke of Newcastle died. The title went to his eldest son. His eldest son died with no sons, so the title now went to his youngest son. So Henrietta Hope now becomes the Duchess of Newcastle, right, with a waster of a husband. Mrs. Hope doesn't know what to do with all her money. She doesn't want to give it to him. So what she does is she pays him a pension of 50,000 a year to keep him quiet, and she decides that when they have a son, that her money and her estates will go to her grandson, right? On one condition, that they add the name Hope to the end of their surname. Their surname was Pelham Clinton. So her grandson was baptized Francis Pelham Clinton Hope, and he becomes the first Lord Hope, okay? The husband continues to gamble and do all the things he shouldn't be doing, and he drops dead eventually. I'll give you a story. Henrietta remarried afterwards. She did marry a second time and had a slightly more subdued marriage to her second husband. And of course, Lord Francis Pelham Clinton Hope, turned out to be a greater waster than his father ever was. And they wouldn't give him the diamond. The diamond never came to Castleblayney because they're afraid he'd sell it, right? He needed the money. So eventually he went bankrupt, and it was him that destroyed everything. But anyway, Mrs. Hope, in redesigning the Hope Castle, added this horrendous Victorian porch, stuck it on the Georgian, and you see on the outside here she's got a butler. I assume that's the butler. This photograph taken in 1901, the butler actually might be the butler for the Duke of Connaught, who rented the house for a while in the early 1900s. The Duke of Connaught was the son of Queen Victoria. He was the commander-in-chief of the British Army. He's one of those members of the royal family who were soldiers but never fought anywhere. And he came to live here with his wife and his family. He was here for about 4 years. And the reason he came to Castleblayney was his mistress was Mrs. Leslie of Castle Leslie, and he wanted to be close to his mistress. Now his mistress, of course, is one of those Jerome sisters, one of whom was Winston Churchill's mother, who was another lady who enjoyed herself. And there were 3 sisters, the Jerome sisters, well worth reading about them. And one of the Jerome sisters was Mrs. Leslie, and she was the Duke of Connaught's mistress. So he came to Castleblayney so he could be close to her. That's why he was here. I think that's his butler. Now this is what she did to the roof. She took off the porch, she took off the dome, she took off the slates, and she tried to make it into a French chateau. She didn't want it to look like an English mansion house. And she's sort of trying to make it look a bit like Versailles, with all the figueres you see along the top and all the balls and everything. She changes it into that, and she puts the statue. And you can see the statue here, right? And this photograph was taken about 1905, so the statue's still up there. Till the county council get at it. They obviously don't know it's there, or they don't. She added the conservatory towards the back and extended the house in that direction, and the kitchens are downstairs. And anyone who was in the convent will know. You've been in the kitchens when they were downstairs. They're in the basement. This is the drawing room of Lord Blayney. Mrs. Hope divided it into two rooms, a sort of a sitting room and a drawing room. But this photograph was taken in the 1950s after the Franciscan nuns had moved in, and they changed it into their own chapel. So that's the full room that Lord Blayney built. Robert Woodgate designed the full length of the building, but with, you see, the partition wall that Mrs. Hope put in to make 2 rooms out of it. The nuns, of course, used it. The altar was up at the top end there. The nuns knelt in the front, and then people, when we went to I went every Lent morning to Mass there. We knelt in the back room and could see the Mass. Father Frank used to say Mass, but every so often he'd miss out the consecration and things like that. Father Frank said a very quick Mass. Sorry, Noel?
I was as all the
So was I. Yeah. So,
6 o'clock in the morning, went up through those trees.
We used to do all the while for the Easter ceremonies. And in those days you couldn't have communion unless you fasted from the night before. So you couldn't eat anything at all during Easter Saturday. And then myself and some of the boys here went up to do the midnight Mass in that chapel. And it was great because when it was over, the nuns took us into the dining room and gave us a big breakfast at 2 o'clock in the morning. A big fry of fried eggs and rasher and the whole lot. Not only that, they gave us a chocolate Easter eggies and 10 shillings. Right? So doing the Easter ceremonies was a big thing for me when I was growing. But that's what the chapel was. And this then is the actual chapel itself. I'm not sure where those 2 photographs came from. People can pass me on photographs. I must keep notes of them. But that is Lord Blayney's drawing room. Mrs. Hope's sitting room and dining room. Okay? And then the nuns' chapel when the Franciscan nuns were in. She went out to the Conquer Wood and built a summer house, which she designed as a Greek temple. Again, as sort of a tribute to her husband, who did a lot of variant Greek temples and Greek statues and all that sort of stuff, which is why it's temple. Red brick only had 2 rooms in it. I know Liam McGrath, I think, was born in it, and I think Frank Marin was born in it. A number of families in the town eventually would have lived in it. And then, of course, she also designed another French house. This is the South Lodge. And again, a very unusual, it's not English, it's a French design. Everything she designed was French. She took over French stonemasons. The houses up in Church Street are the French cottages. She built those for her workers on the estate. The lodge Barney MacDonald lived in up at the top of Church Street is another French design. That's definitely a French design there. And most of the lodges and most of what she built around the estate are of a French design. She didn't like the English. She wanted everything to look French. Then, of course, we have the annex, or the stables as they call them, Now, there were stables there before Mrs. Hope. The Blaney's had stables there as well, on a sort of a similar design, but she redesigned them. Now, when you look at it on this side here, the first couple, 2 or 3 bays here, were a private house. And the gardener who worked in the gardens here lived in that house with his family. Okay? At one stage, a man called Anderson lived in it. On the other side, this side, the first 3 bays or so, was another private house, and the manager of the farm lived on that side. Okay? The horses and the carriages, of course, the horses' stables were down both sides, and the carriages were in the big rooms, the first floor rooms, down on the far side. And any stable boys or unmarried young fellas working on the farm would sleep up in the upstairs rooms above the carriages. Now, in my time, I remember Father Mohan and Father McKenna lived in one of the houses there on the right-hand side. Now, on the gable of this house, this one, up here, was the bell. And they used to ring the bell for the workers on the estate to tell them it was dinner time and to come in to get their meals. The Franciscan nuns then moved the bell over to the Hope Castle, and they used it as a religious bell. And then some Franciscan nuns came home from South Africa, and they wanted a bell for their new mission out in South Africa. And the nuns here gave them, look, Mrs. Hope's bell, and the bell is now somewhere in South Africa, on a church somewhere out in the Velds somewhere, and that's where it ended up. The bell that used to be here is long since gone, right?